Hello and welcome back to Exothermic Plays Games. I'm Exothermic and the date today is Sunday, October 6th, 2024. I've been doing a countdown of my favorite video games of all time through each day of the year, and coming in at number 87 is Super Mario World. Story time! My grandparents lived in the same small town as me, and while usually my parents could figure out a schedule to pick us up from school, sometimes work or other things would get in the way and we'd head on over to their house. It actually was so much cooler than just a house. They owned a retail business in one of the oldest buildings in town and lived upstairs. It was a dollhouse miniatures and antique store, so they had a lot of cool, really old stuff, and every time I visited them, it was like transporting back in time. The building was over 150 years old, and at different points in time was a stable, a blacksmith, the police station, a hotel, and even a bowling alley, or at least it had a few lanes. But renovations were done in the 1980s, expanding the third floor, culminating in an almost fairy tale-like spire tower overlooking the town. The building was on Main Street, and we'd all sit on the roof during parades as kids, and people on tall floats or firefighters on ladders from their trucks would toss candy to us, and there was a lot of just great memories. The back of the building immediately overlooking the winding river running through the middle of town. I could watch boats go by from the back patio suspended well above the ground below. Unfortunately, after my grandmother passed away and my grandfather retired, he sold the building because it would have been way too big for just him, and the folks that bought it tore it all down to build a very boring hotel. Of course, I loved the people that lived there, but I also loved and greatly miss the building itself, and I definitely spent a lot of time there. My paternal grandmother owned a Super Nintendo and owned, from what I remember, exactly 2 games on it. I'll be talking about the other one and the rest of the story on Tuesday, but of course one of them was Super Mario World. And because of that, this is the first Mario game I ever played, and also the one I've played the most. Much of Super Mario World is just a continuation of what came before, with excellent side-scrolling platforming, brilliant level design, and just perfect controls. However, Super Mario World also introduced a whole lot of things, but the most important thing it did was introduce the world to Yoshi. I love that little green dinosaur, and it's one of the reasons I've played the first level of this game so many times. If you complete a level while on Yoshi's back, you get to keep Yoshi as you move around the overworld and start whatever stage you pick next with it. The first stage of the game not only has an easily accessible Yoshi, but it's also got a ton of one-ups throughout it, from hidden blocks, to easily accessible coins, to even just the very first enemies you run into in the game being one of the most satisfying, we'll call it fights, in the history of gaming, ingrained into my brain. But Yoshi's not the only new thing here. The Cape Feather lets you fly, well, more like glide, through the air with a level of verticality the other games in the series up until that point didn't have, and the game was the first one to let you store power-ups, allowing you to have a backup plan or shift into different suits as you needed them. The 7 worlds of the game offer tons of variety to the stages, and unlocking additional pathways via hidden exits in several of them is a rewarding and exciting time. Yes, some parts are fairly formulaic, with the puzzle-oriented haunted houses and the castles at the end of each world, but I appreciate every single one of them. Unlike most platformers, especially of the time, I thought the water levels were actually pretty fun and didn't feel like a chore to get through, and the different enemies and little hidden items were all loads of fun. I especially love Chargin' Chuck, the Koopa in the football gear that runs at you, who was introduced in this game, and changing the flagpoles of the earlier titles to a moving target bar is actually way more interesting. One of the things I spent the most time on, however, was trying to track down the special big coins on each level, which would often require the use of specific power-ups, hidden blocks, or movements you could only do with Yoshi's help. For how adorable Yoshi is, and how immediately the world fell in love with him, you have to get real cool about sacrificing your new friend real fast. Just like jumping off his back to get just a little bit higher as he plummets to his death. Speaking of games with comical deaths, join me tomorrow as I talk about my 86th favorite game where a Scottish explosives expert maybe uses fewer safety protocols than he should.